Last Friday, the newsletter from Ben Murray, the SaaS CFO, landed in my inbox. It included a link to updated retention benchmarks. I decided then and there that this would be the core topic for this week's video. So let's start with a number because I think it's going to change how a lot of B2B SaaS founders think about their business this year. The number is 84%. That is the new median for gross revenue retention in SaaS, according to the 2026 Benchmark IT B2B SaaS and AI native metrics report that Ben Murray broke down. Last year, that median was 88%. The top quartile also fell from 95% down to 91%. So for anyone unfamiliar with this metric, gross revenue retention, or GRR, measures how much of your existing annual recurring revenue, or ARR, you keep after churn and contraction, and before you add a single dollar of expansion or a single new logo. So it's the cleanest test of whether your existing customer base is actually staying with you, because you can't mask a leaky bucket with aggressive upselling. The 4-point drop may sound small, but it's far from it. If you're a business with $10 million in annual recurring revenue and moving from 88 to 84% in gross revenue retention, that means you're losing an extra 400,000 in revenue every year before you even consider growth. And at 50 million in annual recurring revenue, that's a 2 million hole every single year. And that's before you bring in a single new customer. Ben's data also breaks this down in ways that matter if you're trying to work out where you are as a business. Seat-based pricing shows the lowest gross revenue retention of any pricing model, and that gap is widening, while vertical SaaS holds a real retention load over horizontal SaaS. Gross revenue retention expectations shift by average contract value segment as well. So the benchmark for a $5,000 deal and a $75,000 deal are not the same conversion. I'll put the full breakdown in the description, but the headline is basically this: a single blended retention number will hide almost anything useful about your business. This isn't just an operating metric anymore. It's a material change to how you calculate growth, whether you're raising or exiting. Investors are already adjusting for it, whether they've said it to you or not. So what's happening across the market, not just to companies with obvious churn problems? Ben Murray points to 3 forces, and I want to walk you through each one because they each land on your desk differently, depending on whether you run finance, sales, or customer success. The first is AI disruption of renewals. This is a topic that has made many headlines over the last 12 months. Buyers are consolidating their tool stacks and testing every renewal against what a native AI alternative can do instead. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're cancelling, but they will be negotiating harder, trying to downgrade tiers or declining to expand without telling you. And none of this will show up as a lost logo. And this is the one I think most customer success teams are not built to spot. AI productivity tools let customers run leaner teams. And fewer people means fewer seats. So what Ben Murray's exact framing is that the 100% logo renewal rate. No one cancelled. The contract just renewed at 85% of last year's value. And he compares it to the scene of Ghostbusters, where you never cross the streams. So gross revenue retention falling below your logo retention number is that crossed streams moment. You don't see it often, and when you do, it means the leak isn't in who's leaving. It's in how much they're paying to stay. The third force is expansion dependency. At the median company, 40% of net new annual recurring revenue now comes from expansion rather than new logos. And in a low growth cohort, that climbs to 44%. So nearly half of that group's growth comes from existing customers. And what Murray points out here is that once expansion crosses 40% of net new annual recurring revenue, that stops amplifying your growth and it actually starts to substitute it. What that means is that you're in a more fragile position to grow from, even if the top line chart looks good. No one in the finance commentary on this data says this part clearly, but it's the reason that I wanted to make this video. If revenue is leaking through seat rationalization and it's leaking without a single churn logo, then a customer success team measuring only on logo retention or activity-based health scores cannot see it happening. The dashboard says that everything's fine. The revenue tells an entirely different story. That gap is exactly where I've been telling founders that their risk lives months before it shows up anywhere visible. It's the same argument that I've been making about revenue leakage all week. Customers that shrink don't announce themselves any louder than the ones that slip away silently. And if 40% or more of your growth now depends on expansion, your customer success team is no longer a retention function. It's your primary growth engine. And that changes what the role needs to be. It's not a person who manages relationships and handles escalations well. It's someone who reads a customer's business closely enough to see a seat count shrinking before the renewal conversation, who can have a commercial conversation about it instead of a service one. And that's the strategic thinker role that I talk about often. So we're not talking about the troubleshooter, the reactive mode. And most customer success teams are still hired and trained for the wrong profile. Ben Murray's own research backs this up from a finance perspective. He found that companies that are staying at the gross revenue retention rate of above 91%, which is the current top quartile, treat retention as a revenue function, not a support function. So they are quantifying the risk signals at 60 and 90 days before renewals, not 30 or less. They own a renewal number by segment and by cohort the way that a CFO owns a forecast. Some people call this retention P&L or retention profit and loss. I would say that it's joint accountability that most customer-led growth work is actually trying to build, and it's not something that customer success can own on its own. Companies leading on the rule of 40, i.e., the most profitable companies in the benchmark, are now the ones that are combining subscription pricing with usage or outcome layers. And that's what Murray calls the subscription plus usage cohort. In the case of Intercom's Fin AI agent, for example, that's priced per outcome on top of the seat pricing. So it's like a typical example of what that combination looks like. The model rewards a customer for getting more value, and it means that customer success's job shifts from tracking whether someone logged in this week to tracking whether they're actually extracting value from the solution. And the difference between health scoring on activity and health scoring on business impact is how it shows up in this data. So what do you actually do with this if you're a founder or a head of customer success watching this video? Well, Ben Murray gives finance leaders a 4-step diagnostic. I want to translate it for your seat at the table. First, you should segment your retention number. Don't trust one single blended gross revenue retention number. Please break it out by customer size, by cohort, by product line. That's the segmentation point from earlier in the video. So a $5,000 average contract value cohort and a $75,000 average contract value cohort do not behave in the same way, and blending them hides the one that really needs attention. Secondly, calculate where you're seeing erosion. Take 1 minus gross revenue retention and multiply that by your annual recurring revenue. That's the size of the hole that you're filling from zero every year before a single new logo or expansion dollar counts. If that number has grown year over year, your business is getting structurally harder to grow, whatever your top line chart is saying. Third, stress your expansion dependency. If expansion is 40% or more of your net new annual recurring revenue, model what happens if that slows down by 20 to 30%. If your growth number goes negative in that scenario, you need to have a board conversation. Fourth, would you even see a seat rationalization leak happening right now in your best customers before the renewal date arrives? Because if the honest answer is no, then it's not a people problem. There's a system that you haven't built and it's costing you money. I've spent 20 years watching the moment a customer relationship starts to erode long before anyone notices in a churn report. This data has just given Instinct a number and a deadline. I'll link Murray's full piece to the description because I really think it's worth a read. It's one of the clearest breakdowns that I've seen of what's happening in the market right now, and it's worth reading end to end, not just watching my take on it. If you don't know your gross revenue retention by segment, or you're not sure your team would catch this kind of leak before the renewal date, that's usually the first thing we'll find in a customer led growth clarity call. It's free, it's 45 minutes, and you walk away with your number one growth gap and a 30-day plan. I've included the link below. So to finish, let me ask you this question. What would your team's honest answer be if I asked them right now whether they would see this coming? More to follow next week.